Hello, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm excited to be introducing you guys to this webinar with we have Copia, Claroty, and Frost and Sullivan as our speakers. Today we're going to be talking about navigating NIS2 and the likelihood and the kind of the regulations around that and what the repercussions are for NIS2 frameworks. I'd like to begin by introducing Peter Lund. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it back on over to our team to take us further.
Thanks, Cameron. Great to have fellow panelists here with me today. So we're going to spend some time exploring some of the critical aspects of the NIS2 Directive and its impact on manufacturing and distribution sectors. So with me is Jerry Abbey from Copia. Welcome, Jerry. And Sebastian Trolli from Frost and Sullivan. Great to be with you guys. We've got a kind of panel style discussion. We're going to jump into our questions. And the first question is really around how has the convergence of IT and OT environments amplified cyber risks for manufacturing and distribution? And what are the most pressing threats organizations face today in the light of regulations like NIS2? And we're going to have Sebastian kind of kick us off with this one.
Okay, sure. Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Jerry, also as well. Yeah, this is a very important question to kick things off. You know, we all know that the IT-OT convergence has transformed in a way production sites into hyper-connected systems, right? Expanding the attack surface from isolated control rooms and operational systems to cloud-linked supply chains, right? Once isolated systems like PLCs, SCADAs, DCS, and IIoT sensors now connect to corporate networks and cloud platforms, right? Which allow attackers to pivot from email compromise to plant floor disruption, okay? We all know that manufacturing accounted for 25% of global cyber attacks in 2024, right? And 75% of ransomware incidents caused partial OT shutdowns, with downtime losses averaging around 5.5 million US dollars per event, right? And to name a few, you know, high impact examples include Norsk Hydro and Varda's pipeline shutdown in 2024. So the NIS2 directive emerged to counter this risk, requiring continuous monitoring, risk management, and incident preparedness across the IT-OT converged environment, right? So regulatory pressure imposed by NIS2 reflects the economic stakes, right? And planned outages jeopardize revenues, safety, and national supply chains, right? Frost and Sullivan estimates that the IT-OT convergence market is at around $50 billion in 2023, growing at a 14.5% CAGR to $130 billion by 2030, right? Yet, we warn that the same connectivity fueling Industry 4.0 also enables threat propagation from corporate networks into plant floor PLCs unless security keeps pace. So I don't know if those insights can help, you know, setting the stage in terms of IT-OT convergence, right? And the importance not just of the trend per se, right, with all these Industry 4.0 technologies, but also all the challenges and dangers in terms of cybersecurity and risks, right, in terms of cybersecurity that this trend, right, the IT-OT convergence brings to the enterprises, right?
Yeah, they certainly do, Sebastian, and that's some great research. And Claroty's own research team has kind of dug into this area. We've got a fantastic paper called The Global State of Industrial Cybersecurity. And I'm just going to quote a couple interesting facts from there. So you kind of talked a bit about kind of the financial impact of downtime, but with that financial impact, we're seeing that, you know, 50% of organizations that have some sort of incident typically experience 12 hours or more of downtime. So obviously downtime converts directly into things like financial impact, but it also, you know, becomes a safety issue as well as just, you know, putting additional stresses and strains on those organizations. And an interesting bit around connectivity from our report is, you know, oftentimes, you know, ICS and OT were considered to be, you know, air gapped, data dioded. There were no specific ways that were prescribed to get in, but organizations are now stating that around 50% of their cyber physical systems are either intentionally or unintentionally connected to the internet. So we've got obviously, you know, legacy industrial control systems that are very well understood, but now we're starting to bring in things like physical security systems, lights, cameras, badge readers, HVAC systems. All of that is kind of natively connected to the extended Internet of Things type approach. And those systems can oftentimes be what causes you to be compromised. I was able to attend a Black Hat last week, and lots of interesting studies around, HVAC systems and building management systems being the source of a new, easier way to compromise casinos. So some fantastic research there at Black Hat. With that, we'll kind of pass it over to Jerry to elaborate a bit further.
Thank you both. So many great points, and the one thread that I think is going to be throughout this conversation today is that expanding surface. Like you just mentioned, Pete, the HVAC systems being compromised. There's new, more vulnerable places that people had never thought of before that continue to open up the surface area for an attack. And I'm going to quote a couple stats from our recent State of Industrial DevOps report. It's the second year that we've done the report, and it's really interesting to see the costs being driven by the change within operational technology and throughout the organization. So the biggest, most notable stat within this report is that 45% of all downtime is driven by industrial code. That's planned and unplanned downtime. And for a lot of organizations, especially as the bigger you get, the more of a key piece driving downtime industrial code is. When you look at the revenue of organizations, when it hits over 15 billion, 70% of their downtime is attributed to industrial code. And then when you look at the amount of devices they have, the length of downtime they have, and other critical metrics, it just exponentially expands by the size of the organization. And that complexity is driving up the cost of downtime. The average this year, 3.63 million per hour, and the C-suite is quoting it at 4.29 million per hour, seeing the cost beyond just a line being down. But when you have to bring in insurance companies and lawyers and all of these cascading effects across the operations up and downstream your supply chain, it's this widening attack surface is causing a lot of pain. And what really puts all of this in context is for 2 years in a row, cybersecurity breaches have been the #1 cause of unplanned downtime, according to our research. And this year that tied with industrial code. So definitely a complex issue here that we're going to continue to unpack.
Thanks, Jerry. I think with that, we're going to dive into the next question around some of the changes in recent scope when it comes to NIS2 and key requirements. We're going to do just some kind of clarification around which entities in manufacturing and distribution are impacted and what are some of the core requirements. And we'll start with Sebastian here to kind of bring us through some of the scope and key requirements.
Absolutely. Thank you, Peter. And yeah, a couple of things, really important things to talk about here. First of all, let's start saying that NIS2 is, for those who are not familiar with, right, is the European Union's 2022 cybersecurity directive that replaces the 2016 NIS or NIS framework, right? And this NIS2 elevates cyber resilience to a board-level obligation across 17 essential and important sectors, including most manufacturing and distribution activities based on sector criticality and size. So we have essential entities and then we have important entities, right? So which are those essential entities? Essential entities apply to operations whose disruption would critically affect society, underpinning healthcare, energy, or other critical services, for instance, medical device or vaccine plants, right? On the other hand, we have important entities, which capture most medium to large manufacturers and distributors of chemicals, food, machinery, electrical equipment, and automotive parts, right? As well as logistic firms moving critical goods. So either if you are an essential entity or an important entity, you have core duties, right, to comply with, right? For instance, core duties span risk management, asset inventories, incident handling, continuity planning, technical controls like, for instance, multi-factor authentication, encryption, segmentation, and also supply chain assurance, right? We can also say that both categories must implement the same security controls, risk assessments, policies, incident response, supply chain assurance, but important entities are policed ex post, right? That means after an incident or complaint rather than through routine audits or inspections. So basically just to summarize, or in a nutshell, what we can say is that, in short, NIS2 elevates cybersecurity to a board-level duty, broadens sectorial scope, tightens timelines, and also adds real financial and reputational consequences for non-compliance, because the fines for not complying to NIS2, the NIS2 Directive, are similar to those of GDPR, right? We are talking about millions of euros in fines if you don't comply with this NIS2 Directive.
Thanks, Sebastian. Yeah, it almost starts to remind me of some of the national electric regulatory things we've done in the US around keeping the bulk electric system secure. So I'm going to take a little bit different approach and talk about, Sebastian mentioned sort of the entities that might be impacted. So in addition to entities, you need to think about the specific systems that are going to be on scope. So think about all the cyber physical assets and networks. And they've painted a very wide scope, talking about any kind of electronic communications network or any device or group of interconnected related devices which process data automatically, digital or store data. So very, very, very broad from a device standpoint, essentially anything that's critical to your business operations. And then they overlay that with many different sort of traditional cyber or security operations where you need policies on risk analysis and information systems, policies around incident handling, business continuity and crisis management. You need to look into your supply chain security in system acquisition, development, and maintenance, assessment of cybersecurity risk management measures, basic cyber hygiene practices and training, policies related to crypto and encryption, and then traditional incident reporting. So really, really broad and deep sort of requirements here, and certainly not easy for any organization who's been kind of immature or kind of understaffed in these areas. So it is a fairly significant kind of board level effort that needs to go in place at your organization to sort of be in compliance and in line with these things.
Great.
And then we'll have Jerry sort of talk a bit here. Yeah.
Yeah, just add in on that. Some of the things that really stood out to me when reading through the NIS2 guidelines is something that's been going on in software for a long time, and it's really honestly refreshing to see it being pulled into the operational technology space, and that's having robust change management and version control around your industrial code. It's so important to have that rigor to understand what's going on, who's accessing it, and what they can do with that access. And it is the future of this space for every reason that we've already touched on. The expansive nature of it, continuing to expand more, it's more and more vital to have that change management and comprehensive version control in space, and something I'll talk about more in future answers. But industrial code lifecycle management. Copia is an industrial DevOps platform, and the way that you can really achieve industrial DevOps today is through an approach of treating your code as a critical asset through industrial code lifecycle management. It's bringing that layer of rigor that just hasn't existed and hasn't really been possible until now.
Yeah, that's fantastic stuff. Certainly, borrowing lots out of the IT playbook when it comes to the cyber physical space here. So the next question we're going to kick off is kind of the criticality of visibility and asset management for being compliant with things like NIS2. So very much the mission here at Claroty is helping folks understand, their assets, their asset base, how they're changing, and the threats related to them. And again, that's very foundational as you build into, additional competencies or even go into the industrial DevSecOps. You really have to know what assets you have before you can even start to begin to secure them, segment them. So Claroty is fantastic at finding amazing ways to provide visibility, not always necessarily through traditional means as well. So we've got traditional, asset discovery, passive based. We can do active queries. We've got fantastic containerized, edge collectors that can be deployed very quickly and easily within, modern and legacy style environments with things like virtualization. So we really cover the gamut and ultimately try to find and give customers that kind of 100% visibility level for the purpose of cybersecurity, right? Knowing what you have is important, but getting to the point where you can understand vulnerabilities and their impact, understand how you can have a better segmentation plan, understand your critical assets from a backup and recovery standpoint. All this is kind of foundational to any of those additional kind of NIS2 directives and standards that you need. So really, really visibility at its core is important before you head down any compliance journey. And NIS2 is no different than any other in that regard.
Yeah, and building off of that, Pete, nailed that. The gauntlet has been out there for a long time of making asset identification table stakes today with everything that Claroty as a pioneer in the space has been able to do. It's opened up that next stage, again, looking at what software has done for over a decade at this point and being able to apply it to the cyber physical space of now that you can identify all those assets, bringing in the rigor and control around how they're being operated, changed, and backed up. One of the other things that's so important in this space is there's so many different proprietary types of devices. So if you're looking at PLCs, you have the Rockwell, Snyder's, Siemens, and everybody else out there. And then you also have all of those other devices that we've touched on. And it's vital to be able to pull all that stuff into one space and have that single source of truth for visibility into what's going on. It brings that single pane of glass view that I hear about so often as we try and get the operational technology space under control. There's been so many conversations I've had with the CISOs saying, we need that single pane of glass and how can we get to it? And that's something that we think about all the time. And on top of that, what more can we do with today's technologies to make that single pane of glass, that single source of truth even stronger? And it's adding in an AI intelligence layer to have notifications sent when something has changed and looks like it may create a vulnerability, to have an AI that can produce in natural language a description of what's changed on that device so they can say, oh, well, that's in line with what I was expecting, or that does not make any sense in terms of the context of what we're looking at today, and we need to investigate it. But today's technology is now advancing in a way where while NIS2 can seem overwhelming, there are technologies out there that can really support this transition. And I think Claroty and Copia deliver those types of approaches.
Absolutely.
Absolutely,
and if I
Jerry.
may, sorry, Peter.
No, I was going to say, yeah, Sebastian, you're up next. Yep.
No, yeah, I just great explanation from both. I just want to add, the analyst perspective, right? More from probably from a theoretical or conceptual standpoint, right? there's a principle in security, right, in cybersecurity that says you can't secure what you don't know what you have, right? So asset visibility is the foundation of both security and NIS2 compliance, because simply firms cannot defend or report on systems they do not know exist, right? So NIS2 requires a continuously updated inventory of all relevant assets, their configurations, vulnerabilities, and also the data flow between IT and OT networks, right? So in industrial facilities, this spans, as I said, legacy PLCs, SCADA systems, IIoT devices, IT, OT convergence systems, right? Those who are communicating between the enterprise layer and the shop floor layer as well, right? Engineer workstations, for instance, and so forth, right? And comprehensive visibility underpins requirements such as risk assessments that rely on asset criticality. Incident responders need to know what was affected. Business continuity plans depend on understanding which systems must stay online, right? And also comprehensive visibility streamlines regulatory audits, right? Boards can prove where assets reside, who last modified control code, and how vulnerabilities are tracked and remediated, a level of assurance regulators increasingly demand. So in a nutshell, and to summarize, asset visibility is both the foundation of NIS2 compliance and a key enabler of proactive industrial OT cybersecurity.
Absolutely, Sebastian. Thank you for reinforcing there. So we're going to switch kind of gears a bit deeper into kind of the practical application of NIS2 from a cybersecurity risk management standpoint. So obviously part of the standard there. And we're going to talk a bit around our approaches for enabling organizations to proactively identify and prioritize exposure and vulnerabilities in industrial environments, because that is a very difficult task. You know, certainly the traditional vulnerability management and risk management procedures in IT of just simply waiting for, you know, patches to come out or isolating assets when they're, you know, providing potential suspicious type activity doesn't always fly in industrial environments. You have to have a little bit more context and a really deep understanding of the industrial environment before you can start to understand risk and exposure. And since Claroty does provide that deep level of visibility, we're able to do better when it comes to things like, you know, vulnerabilities, device misconfigurations, you know, unencrypted weak passwords or unencrypted traffic. And we bring in deep context of not only, you know, the asset and its you know, extended properties, but also its purpose at a higher level to the organization. So if we know that this PLC is part of a manufacturing line that's critical to operations, and if that manufacturing line goes down, we realize that it's millions of dollars worth of, you know, inventory that might spoil or production that's going to be delayed, versus a PLC that might be part of a less important system where if it was to be compromised or have downtime, there'd be much, much less impact, because we understand, you know, cybersecurity teams continue to be asked to do more with less resources. So we really, within our platform, help everyone get down to those. If I'm going to fix, you know, one thing this week, Claroty can help bubble up that right to the top through some amazing capabilities when it comes to simulation, remediation measures, you know, putting in a mock firewall rule and determining what endpoints are going to have issues, talking across that net new divide. So some really fantastic stuff there can help cyber defenders essentially be more effective with the time that they have. Next, we'll hear from Copia talking about how some of their DevSecOps helps here as well.
Thanks, Pete. And it's such a good segue thinking about parts of what you just talked through. Like, first and foremost, and Sebastian said it as well, you need that visibility to understand what's going on. And then once you have that visibility, you can assess the criticality. What is the most critical thing to address? And then you can bring in that ability to manage and remediate as appropriate for your operation. And this all aligns with what Copia was founded on, this vision of industrial DevOps. It's a methodology for applying lean, agile, and DevOps principles to the planning, development, manufacturing, and serviceability of cyber physical systems. Now, I know that is a mouthful, but it's really the evolution of process. When you look back at the history of how we've changed since the beginning of time with manufacturing, we had custom manufacturing is how it was forever. We had standardized parts, and it advanced things a little bit so that we were able to have interchangeable pieces and could standardize the production, which moved us into mass production. From mass production, we moved into lean and the Toyota production system. Over the next couple decades, software started borrowing bits and pieces and pulled in the waterfall methodology for software development and iterated into applying Agile and creating DevOps, this union of development and operations teams. And also what's missing in that is the security teams, because that's the foundation. DevOps brought them in and made everything way more seamless and removed the walls and barriers that exist in many operations teams today. So that's a quick breakdown of the history, and then diving into like, how does industrial DevOps apply in your environment? It is achieved through a technical foundation of industrial code lifecycle management, this systematic approach to your industrial automation code. And like I mentioned earlier, really treating it as a critical asset. And when you bring this approach into your operational technology environment, one of the biggest things it does is it builds trust. Your information technology group and your CISO are used to the way things have been for the last 10 or 15 years in that IT space. And when they look at OT, sometimes it can be confusing, sometimes they are lacking information, sometimes they are uncertain why things are the way they are. And a lot of it has been for the protection of these cyber physical systems and the avoidance of downtime. But that crutch of a DMZ, as mentioned earlier, with the expanse of new devices being added all the time, doesn't really exist the way it used to. So more than anything, I see industrial DevOps helping with the unification of IT and OT teams. And rather than this convergence that's been happening for decades, it's bringing in a set of processes that unifies, centralizes, and builds resilience across your operations and your teams to approach the problems that we're facing today with a modern lens.
That's great, Jerry, and thank you, Peter and Jerry. And if I may, I would like to add some overview on, from an analyst perspective, right, on the best practices in cybersecurity risk assessments for industrial organizations, something that both Claroty and Copia solutions can achieve, right? Absolutely. So let's consider that NIS2 shift organizations from periodic audits to continuous risk-based security management, right? So a couple of best practices are, number one, real-time network monitoring to detect behavioral anomalies without disrupting, of course, OT assets. Number two, automated discovery fits a vulnerability knowledge base customized to industrial equipment, instantly highlighting firmware flaws in secure services or default passwords. Then, as a third step or third best practice, we can mention effective platforms then score each exposure by combining common vulnerability scoring systems, severity, asset criticality, network accessibility, and threat intelligence context. And last but not least, continuous risk assessment loops like the plan, do, check, act framework that ensure that new vulnerabilities, configuration drift, or process changes are immediately reflected in the risk register and remediation plans. So in a nutshell, to summarize, regulators will expect to see such a dynamic methodology being applied, supported by evidence of patching, compensating controls, and effectiveness in testing.
Well, that's some great guidance, Sebastian. Like, kind of gone are the days of old where doing a walk down of your industrial complex was sufficient, because as we know, in between those walk downs, things can change, and we need to be much more reactive when it comes to threats and changes to our environment. Which is a great segue to kind of reacting. We've got a bit around, incident response and business continuity related to NIS2. So NIS2's got some pretty stringent mandates around IR and what you need to do for business continuity. So I'll talk a bit around how Claroty provides kind of insight, which, typical solutions that, everyone's got, their SIM or SOAR of choice, and they've been running it in the IT side of the world for quite some time. They have some incident response plans and business continuity plans there. And really, when you deploy a solution like Claroty, you're now providing some fantastic level of visibility into the cyber physical suite at your enterprise, and that comprehensive visibility allows us to do things like send those real-time alerts over to your SIM or SOAR of choice, so you can, one, get visibility to them, and two, come up with the appropriate response playbooks, where IT responses are typically to deny traffic or disable a user. Well, in OT, the responses look a little bit different. It's typically contact a plant manager or dig in a bit further to understand what that asset's purpose is before you then go into supporting things like actual segmentation or actual dropping of packets at a firewall. And then when it comes to kind of business continuity and planning, you really need to have that good understanding of your inventory, and not only just your inventory that's on the floor, but your sparing strategy. And that's where we do some fantastic integrations with the CMDB companies out there, folks like ServiceNow, where we're able to kind of merge your operational suite with your inventory, with your incoming inventory, and really get a full picture of a BCDR type of activity, with all those kind of data sources combined, and Claroty being the Rosetta Stone for your cyber physical suite there. And what's even better is when you bring in Copia's capabilities that Jerry will talk about. It really ties it all together.
Yeah, it ties it together so nicely. It's been so great partnering with Claroty because of the vision of getting everything in place and then bringing in this Copia layer to help in the event of disaster recovery. One of the things that stood out most to me in the State of Industrial DevOps reports, both last year's and this year's, is something we've been talking about, but I want to call out the actual number. So our respondents, most of which are from billion-plus revenue organizations, so large, expansive enterprises, identified that they have over 2,000 PLCs running and over 2,000 associated devices around those PLCs. This is over 4,000 devices. And when you think about the ways that people have and still are today backing those up manually, walking around, plugging in computers, USB sticks, and backing them up that way, even some organizations that might have a little bit more sophisticated method than that, it's just become impossible. And Copia brings in automated backups so that once Claroty's identified all these devices, you know all of the devices, and then you plug in Copia as the next layer, and you back everything up. And why this is important is manyfold, and I'll touch on a couple points. But once you have everything backed up, you know that you have a saved version of the last known good working code. So if a natural disaster happens, we've seen multiple headlines in the last year where a plant got flooded. If a cyber event happens, we've seen a large increase. I think 69%, according to a recent report I saw, said the percentage of ransomware attacks against manufacturing, all cyber attacks. So you have those and many other things to worry about, including just mistakes. Somebody makes a mistake, something breaks. How do you know where the version of the code is that you want to roll back to? So it's so important to have these automated backups. And then what's more, within Copia and where it was started is this Git-based version control, which has been in existence since how long? Around the start of DevOps. And it's just a standard taken for granted in IT, but it's something new and different in OT. But it brings this rigor so that when you think about code management and you have this combination of automated backups and Git-based version control, you also know who changed the code, when they changed the code, what they changed within the code, and why they changed it, which plugs into what NIS2 is asking for and many other directives, and we'll see many more, because this has been standard for a while in the IT space, and we are bringing it to the OT space because it is so very necessary. And then on top of this, just besides just thinking about getting to a standard where you can get IT, your CISO, your executive board, all into the same place, you can also add in this AI layer. Again, expansive devices, so many things to be looking at and thinking about. And when you add in something like AI natural language diff descriptions, which is giving you a description of what happens when a change occurs within the code, automatically pushes through so you can see when those backups come in, what may have changed to them, making it that much easier to understand and to trust what is going on, and to flag if something abnormal is happening. And then also within our version control, having that AI later to help explain what this code is doing. So if you're a manager and you're not working on the code day to day, or a director, or you're a CISO and you're doing an investigation looking at different things, you're able to just ask for a quick interpretation of what's happening there. And this can also document, generate, and do so many more things. But the sophistication of tools continues to change. And that is ever important because the sophistication of ransomware attacks and other attacks that are going to exploit vulnerabilities continues to advance. And we need to make sure that we're prepared with the right tools in the right place to respond, and to respond very quickly to avoid hitting that crushing downtime number of 3.63 million per hour, or whatever it is for your particular organization.
Absolutely.
Oh, that's good stuff.
Sorry again, Peter. No, I was just going to add that it's very clear with both Copia and Claroty solutions, right? How you know the technology, the technology approach of incident response and business continuity, right? From my analyst perspective, what I would like to add and comment on is on the cultural shift that the NIS2 or NIS2 Directive brings, right, to the European enterprises, right? And I would describe same as industrial DevOps, right, which creates the framework is not just about technology adoption, but also a cultural shift. The application of NIS2 is a cultural shift as well, because I would describe this application as a transition from secrecy, I would say, to timely transparency and resilience, right? Why I'm saying this? Because NIS2 imposes strict incident management timelines, right? Initial authority notification within 24 hours, technical update at 72 hours, and a final report within 1 month, right? Meeting this bar requires end-to-end readiness, right? You have to be prepared for this. There has to be a cultural shift in the organization. Manufacturing and distribution firms also that implement these technical capabilities will satisfy the NIS2 requirement for robust incident response and continuity, and more importantly, we will minimize costly downtime, as Jerry was mentioning, right? And one thing one case that clearly exemplifies this is the Norsk Hydro case, right? Which with quick restoration from secure backups, the downtime was limited, and it demonstrated also exemplary governance, right? So this is why more from a technology adoption, NIS2 adoption is also a cultural shift in the organization. It represents a cultural shift in the organizations as well.
Oh, that's great stuff, Sebastian. And I think to take us home on the last question, we've obviously talked about how big and impactful the NIS2 standards and being compliant with them are. We want to switch gears and kind of help with some thoughts around how organizations can get started, or if you're struggling, what are some kind of practical practitioner level things that we've seen and heard from our customer base, and how do we begin, and how do you accelerate your journey if you're already on it? And we'll have kind of Sebastian start there.
Absolutely, yeah. From a high-level overview, and again, my analyst perspective, I would say that the best way to start your NIS2 journey is to follow or to implement a phased and pragmatic roadmap, right? From our perspective, this roadmap should begin with scoping, right? You have to verify the sector and size thresholds. You have to determine if you are essential or important entity status, right? And map which plants, subsidiaries, and IT/OT systems fall into that scope, right? You have to establish governance by appointing an executive sponsor and cross-functional steering team, right? Next, you should perform a gap analysis, right, against NIS2 measures, right? Asset inventory, risk management, access control, supply chain security, incident response, and business continuity. And you can use ISO 27001 or IEC 62443 standards as a reference, right? Prioritizing quick wins, right? Like, for instance, enabling multi-factor authentication, segmenting networks, while planning larger projects such as asset inventory deployment, right? Then you should develop a remediation plan with owners, timelines, and budget, and start implementing critical controls in parallel with policy drafting to show regulators tangible momentum, right? Document every policy, every procedure, and every control as an evidence for auditors, right? And finally, you should adopt an act now and iterate mindset, right? Begin remediation in parallel with planning, track progress through KPIs, and schedule regular maturity reassessments. And why this? Because regulators value demonstrable progress. Acting while planning shows good faith and mitigates enforcement risks. So that I would say should be a high-level overview of a really good plan to start your NIS2 or NIS2 journey.
Great stuff, Sebastian. Kind of from a Claroty standpoint, we obviously will continue to stress that having a great understanding of your assets and visibility is kind of priority. But before we kind of jump in and recommend tools and changes, I kind of urge organizations to actually take stock of the cybersecurity tools you have, understand their capabilities, understand if you're getting as much out of them as you can. As you think about things like, visibility, you may have some amount of visibility from, the networking team, or start with those walkdowns as a way to understand what you have and help them use them as kind of a baseline to start your roadmap for implementing more robust controls. Like, it's impossible to have proper segmentation without, very, very good visibility. Or if you have things like secure remote access, well, you need to understand what assets need remote access and what tools you're using now. Is it just a VPN? Like, get a real good understanding of, your weak points, the points where you're well covered, before you essentially go diving into new tools. And certainly Claroty is happy to help on any of those fronts, but really kind of take a pause and don't jump to, okay, I'm going to buy a product to solve my problems. Get a good understanding of what your organizational problems are, and the folks at Claroty are happy to meet any organization regardless of where they're at with their journey. And that's kind of part of the fun and maturing of the industrial cyber world.
Such great points, Pete. And it makes me think of Dr. Deming. I think his quote was, "No automation should replace a good process." It's that process foundation to get yourself going, get your teams in the same room and on the same page. Once you've done that, then start taking those actions like Sebastian mentioned, looking for quick wins and acting while iterating. thinking about automatically backing up your devices, Copia can come in and get 100 devices backed up in a day. It's where can you get started and just start moving along. If you are looking for robust change management, think about what's most important to your organization, bringing in a industrial code management system, or just getting backed up because you brought in Claroty, you have the assets, and you know that's the next stage. There's all sorts of approaches that you can take, and I couldn't agree more with getting those quick wins, acting and iterating, and doing it after you get the process in place and your team's on board to move in the same direction.
Great stuff. Well, folks, that was our last kind of discussion topic. So I'd like to thank our speakers, Jerry from Copia, Sebastian from Frost & Sullivan. Great to have you guys as, partners, and amazing to see what we can do together to help, continue to secure cyber physical systems that are out there. So everyone, have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Peter.
Pete.
Thank you, Jerry.
Thank you, Sebastian.
Everyone, have a great rest of the day. See you next time.
Thanks, everyone.